Welcome back to Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. I'm personal financial planner, columnist, and financial therapist Rick Kaler. Research tells us that 90% of all financial decisions are made emotionally, not logically. For nearly 4 decades, I've been helping people make better money decisions. So what makes my financial worldview different from most financial experts? I blend the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Good money decisions are not just about the money. So let's get started with today's episode. Well, welcome back to another edition. And I'm really privileged to have on this podcast Sarah Carr. And actually, Sarah and I have already had a discussion because we thought the recorder was going. So this is take number 2. So I don't have to ask Sarah the question is where she practices because she's from upstate New York. She is a CFP and a CFT, Certified Financial Therapist, of which she's one of the, I think it's 104 in the nation. And she and I were recently at the Nasrudin Project retreat outside of Philadelphia. And you've heard me talk about the Nasrudin Project many times. It's a leaderless group of financial planners, therapists, coaches that are brought together because of the intersection of emotions and money. And it's just it's the best thing I go to every year. And I knew Sarah previously to that, and we sat down at a lunch table, and 2 other people joined us, both of which were known to me, both of which I have a online relationship with, but I was meeting them in person for the first time. And we got talking, and I know Sarah and I shared the same background of having come out of a religious cult. And our 2 table mates had the same background, which was just an astounding conversation. And Sarah just told me that this happens to her all over the country, and it was at that point that we decided the recorder wasn't on.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know why it happens. I don't know. There might be part of it that I'm just maybe I weave it into the conversation somehow. Or if I cue in on kind of like some of the, I don't know if there's like a sixth sense maybe that I recognize. Oh yeah, like I come from a similar background, and then it just ends up coming up in conversation pretty freely too, as far as like, oh yeah, me too. I grew up in a cult or cult-like, or I grew up in a very, conservative faith background. It will almost always come up. And and then it's like, well, tell me your story. Let's talk about this. And so I think there's an aspect too, right, of creating a safe space to talk about it and talk about our experiences.
Yeah, that makes some sense, because I don't think I've ever talked about that on the podcast. And I'm in my 4th year.
Yeah.
And I've never really thought, well, the podcast is about financial therapy, and there's a lot of therapy in the topic. I'm like, there's not much financial in the topic, so what's the point? And you and I got talking that, well, you know what? There could be a lot of financial in that that impacts that particular environment of a cult. Maybe before we get into that, say a little bit more, because when I refer to what I came out of as a cult, that it was, I've only started saying that maybe in the last few years. It was really hard to admit or label it that way, or I don't know if that's something you've ever experienced or.
Sure. Yeah, and sometimes I go back and forth on using that word. Sometimes it's a buzzword, if you will. But I think that if there's an environment that your belonging and your physical community safety, all of that, even your financial safety is tied to belonging to a specific group, and then your adherence to that group is reliant on you falling in line, you complying with those uh, explicit rules, but also the implicit rules, right? And if you're not complying, you're not participating in that, then you are excluded. Then that is a cult, especially if those power dynamics of your, for example, your income, your safety, your shelter, some of those kind of basic needs are tied into belonging to that group. Then absolutely, that is a cult.
I recently listened to the author of a book that has just come out, and I have not read it, but I have listened to the author talk about it, called "The Separation of Church and Hate."
Ooh, that sounds fantastic. Yeah,
Yeah,
I have not read that yet.
and he talked about five um, aspects, characteristics of a cult, of which I don't remember. Okay, right?
Yeah, yeah.
This podcast is a conversation. There's not a script here.
It's
There's no
not,
preparation.
we did no prep work. We were going to use this time as prep work, and then we're like, let's just go into it. Let's see what happens.
Um, but the sense of belonging, that it's your whole community.
Yeah.
So when you are, and I think it's typical to be kicked out.
Yeah, and we shared that, like the experience that you and I both have had, and as well as some of the other people that we had connected with, have had experiences of being kicked out or ostracized or shunned, and rejected by the community.
So, uh, and you lose your entire community at that point in time,
Yeah.
which just can be devastating, right?
Absolutely. And sometimes for folks that are in ministry, like getting paid by being part of that community, when they're kicked out, there's not just the loss of the community, but there's the loss of income.
Yeah, say more about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there is a point, and now thankfully, in my experience, my parents were associate pastor. I think children's ministry, youth minister was scheduled or slated to be pastor of a church after the head pastor passed, and that was kind of what was designed. And now let's back up and preference that I was like 8 years old at the time, so I'm experiencing this from a child perspective. But what I know is that my parents had been accused of not tithing appropriately. And now, how someone knows that, I don't, I still wonder how they would know. But they were told that they weren't tithing the correct amount, and therefore were disobedient and not, supportive of the church. And they were being kicked out. The elders had met, and I think it was probably political more than anything, but had decided that they needed to leave, and wrote a letter, said, you can't come, your family, you'll be physically barred from this church. So my dad lost, I mean, it wasn't a lot of income, but he lost that income, lost the community, right? Had to start over. I lost a best friend because this was pre, social media. So I lost one of my very first best friends. And, those kinds of wounds definitely stay with you. And also, like, as a child, like, it's, you witness the possibility of being ostracized like that if you don't fall in line, right? I witnessed my parents' pain in that and going through that, and the conflict that it created, and certainly just the loss of something that they built and that they were part of, and then to be kicked out of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's deeply painful and something that both of us have experienced in rebuilding relationships and friendships, and your sense of where do I belong in the
Yeah.
world? Where do I fit? And I'm just really drawn to being kicked out because you're not tithing. I mean, what did they do? An audit? What?
That's what I wonder. No, I've asked these questions. We have asked these questions before. No, there was no audit, and perhaps maybe my parents knew that there was something deeper, than that. But they found, this sin, because they always have to find a sin that you're committing, and then rally the troops around that, and then in order to back up their decision. But yeah.
So tithing itself, it's something that we both have dealt with
Yep.
clients who are Christians that believe in tithing. And I've had discussions, well, is tithing on the gross? Is
Right.
tithing on the net? Like let's just take a business.
Right. Or here's an even bigger one too. This was for retirees, right? Especially retirees. They've tithed their entire lives on their income. And then so are they tithing again on their retirement distributions, their pension benefit? Like, where do we draw the line on that? Especially like the growth, it goes to the question of the gross or, the net. And, what's interesting to me is just how legalistic folks can get around that and how tied to that they feel absolutely obligated that they can go. I think you and I have both probably seen circumstances where clients' balance sheets, right, their expenses are barely making it, and the tithing aspect becomes a big piece of that, to the point that it's detrimental to their well-being, their financial well-being. And the church, right, is not stepping in and helping. They're not providing extra food or extra supplement, to them. They're just continuing to give to the detriment of themselves.
That's a There's a lot of really good points in all of that. I never really thought of the fact that it's double taxation.
Yeah, that's what I think of. I'm like, wait,
I,
you've already tithed on this amount. This should be free of tithe.
I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, I suppose a legalist might say, well, we're not going to tax the principal, but you need to tithe on the new fruit,
Right.
on the
That's yes.
on the earnings,
On the
right?
earning. Yeah.
So I suppose that might be the way to address that. But you bring up an issue that I had, or a client of mine had. Was a doctor and his wife, and they had been very active in their church. They had tithed, and interestingly enough, it wasn't a fundamentalist church. At least I don't consider most Lutheran churches
Sure.
fundamentalist, right? And they were Lutherans, but they had tithed, and he retired, and they were close. This was a couple that retired in 2001 in the dot-com crash.
Okay. Okay.
A bad time to retire.
Wow. Very bad time to retire.
And and they were just making it on their portfolio retirement income and Social Security. And he said, I got to tithe. And I'm like, oh, that's enough to really blow your plan.
Yeah.
I thought about it. They both were active in the church. They both were giving their time to the church. And I framed it much the way you did. I said, you have given so much financially. You're not working anymore. And now you are still giving of your time. Are you getting any salary for that? No.
Right.
And I said, maybe it's time for your church to give back to you.
Yeah.
Because I think they'd been there for 40, 50 years, something of that sort. And so I liked your framing that, well, the church isn't necessarily supporting the elderly.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I can't think, I'm going back in time of the church I was in. I think, every once in a while, if somebody didn't have some food
Right.
or
Yeah, there'd be like those one-time scenarios, right? Like, oh, or like if they're for an emergency, there's a furnace, so we'll take up a special offering
yes,
for, this particular need.
yes, but there was still the expectation that they
Right.
were to.
Yeah.
And back to the discussions I've had with business owners. I mean, if you take 10% of the gross,
Oh my
sometimes
goodness.
the profit isn't 10%, right?
Right.
And there would be some just like, I've got to do that. And I'm thinking, what's driving a person to give to the financial detriment of their responsibility
Mhm.
to take care of their family? They're not viewing it that way at all.
Right. Right. They're not. What do you think the beliefs are, the underlying scripts are in that, of needing to tithe?
I would think, well, if I don't tithe, I'm not a good Christian, or if I don't tithe, I'm not a Christian at all.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If I don't tithe, that's an affront, an offense to God. I mean, it's the
Yeah,
slippery slope. I mean, it was enough that the church used it to kick your parents out, however they
absolutely.
determined they
Yeah,
wanted to.
because of that morality factor, right? You're no longer good enough to be here.
Something else that came up to me um, is I attended a fundraiser for a Catholic organization. They were building a retreat center.
Hmm.
I attended it with the thought, and my kids went to a Catholic school, and
Yeah,
I'm not Catholic, but it was just a good school.
sure. Yeah.
I went into that thinking, I'm gonna give 250 a month. That's what I'm gonna pledge to give. And halfway through the lunch, they came around with a little envelope, and they said, "We've handed out envelopes, and this is your suggested giving."
Hmm.
I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
"Is that?" And I had to leave for another commitment right there. My wife stayed, and I remember the place and the road I was. On the phone, she says, "Well, do you want to know what our suggested monthly giving amount is?" I said, "I don't know, 250." And she laughed. No, no. 500? Oh, no.
Yeah.
750? No, no, no. You're not even close. 1,000? No. 1,500? No. Okay. She says it's $1,650 a month.
Oh my God. What were they building? Oh my gosh.
They were building, they were remodeling an old um, Benedictine complex or something like that into a retreat center and a school and a school. And I was like, 1,650 a month? You got to be kidding me. Where did
Wow.
they get this? And I had a good friend that's in a men's group I go to, and he's Catholic. And I said, "What is this?" He says, "Oh, yeah. Oh, that's normal." He said, "What they did is they have a little committee that figures out based on what you do and your perceived status of how much they think you can give."
Oh, so these were like personalized.
These
Here's
were, yes,
here's the
yes, they
scale.
were all personalized.
Oh my God. Oh my God. That's so
And I thought, really? And so the father, who was one of the guys ahead of this, I knew really well,
yeah.
and we were friends. And he called me and said, "Yeah, what? Just want to know what your pledge is going to be." And I told him, I said, "Well, going into this, I plan to give 250 a month,
Hmm.
and I have rethought that, and I'm not going to give anything." And he was like, "What?" I said, "Listen, when you said the expectation is for me to give 1,650 a month, I
Yeah.
was going to give 250 a month joyfully,
Right.
happily.
Yes.
Now I have this $1,650 expectation, and
Yeah.
250 I think is an insult. And and if I give more than that, I feel coerced,
Yes.
and I'm not happy about it anymore."
Right. Yeah, the joy is gone. There's no joyful heart in this giving anymore.
And he's like, "Oh, oh, 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 we're happy for anything that you would give." And I said, "I am so sorry, but I just can't do it."
Yeah. You'd be like, man, I got the ick. No, nope, I can't do it anymore.
I got the ick for sure. So that was my exposure to Catholic giving, at least at this one church. I don't know if that's broad based. My friend would suggest that was quite normal. Like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah, you ignore what they expect you to give.
Wow. But also the gall. Like I just like there's still part of it that just is so like Wow, that is so not godly, in my opinion. It's taught so many principles. Oh my goodness. Good for you, though. Good for you. And it doesn't sound like it, but to someone else, what would that have done to them?
Yeah. I think, I don't know if you were Catholic. You probably were, to my friend's point, you were ready for this and you looked at it and you laughed
Yeah, okay.
and then you gave what you wanted to give.
Gotcha.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think most of the people there were Catholic. Um, but this was new to me. I think if that was coming, if I'd reframe that was coming as an expectation from my fundamentalist
Right.
church, there would have been a huge amount of pressure,
Mm-hmm.
um, of expectation. And then I'd have something to lose if I
Right.
didn't meet that expectation, because I would now have a taint.
Mm-hmm.
It would be one foot down the slippery slope.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that what your expectation might be with something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of pressure of you have to give more. And I think that's pretty prevalent in the culture, not just with money, but time, right? Commitment, your energy. We know that those all have component. Why aren't you here? We're doing this project. You need to be here. And when you're not there, then you're looked down on as being less than, as not being as committed, as being as holy, as being as committed to the cause. You're not measuring up, right?
Totally. I don't know if you and I talked about this, but I heard about this at the Nazareth, the expectation of tithes and offerings.
Yeah, yeah, I was there when we had that conversation, and they're two separate things.
And this is, tithes and offerings I kind of bundled together as
Yeah.
one. But I hear
Listen,
that,
I can tell you, very different. I remember every sermon that my dad would preach before the offering was taken. Yes. The tithe is the 10% to bring into the storehouse, right? So that everyone has something. And then the offering is above and beyond and should be given based on the joy of our heart, right? And yeah.
and somehow in the context that I heard this in one particular church, the offering was expected that you're to
Yeah.
give willingly.
Another,
Another
they said
10.
it 10%. I know. So total 20% of your income. This church was telling everyone that they're obligated to make.
I
Yeah.
think I was telling someone about this, and they said, "But it's an offering." Well, yeah, it was kind of like, well, this is the suggested offering.
This is a suggested gift, and we would really appreciate it if you would give this. That goes to something about choice, right? Of taking away. What are your thoughts on that? Of when we're in a position where we're the choice is taken from us to, like you said, like you went into that Catholic scenario of wanting to give 250. You're like, this is a worthy cause. I have the choice and the autonomy to put my resources towards this. And then once it became an obligation, no. And so, yeah, what does that look like, for us who come out of always having obligation versus choice, especially when it comes to giving?
Yes, I think I remember the first time I did something willingly. I was in the 12-step program out of the church by that time, and I did something willingly for a person, and it was so weird because it wasn't an obligation.
Yeah,
And so much is an obligation. But I don't know that I would have admitted that.
yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. Did you also grow up with if you give, tenfold will be given back to you? So, like, that's the reason, like, there was this cause effect. By not giving, you're robbing yourself, you're robbing your future self. Yeah.
That is, I haven't thought of some of this stuff for years. And that's absolutely the case. Is like I'm making an investment here.
Right. Right. But in truth, there was no actual, like what we've seen, there's been no return on that investment. And it's not even like, the some would say that the return would be like a spiritual return, right? That isn't that just buying favor with God?
I think, yeah, I think that would be mixed into it. But there was very much a financial component. Um, and that would be, yeah, through your work or through this or through that. And how do you measure that? Because
Yeah.
there were some folks that knew me back then that would say, well, that absolutely has happened in my life. Um,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think there are people that would say that that happened, and then I would probably push back and be like, okay, well, what about this person who's always given and yet hasn't had the same return?
exactly. But that was the this is the reward that you will get for being compliant. But there is always the obligation, at least on the 10%.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I remember once that I gave 20% of my income one year to a building project, and I got accolades for that. Um,
Mhm.
Public being held up is such a fine example. It was obviously it must not have been anonymous. I think
No.
I think it may have been at one of those services where you're taking pledges and things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I pledged 20%. And oh man, that was just like, wow. I also
Mhm.
happened to be single at the time, and I didn't have a family, and I could.
Right.
And there was some part of me that was happy. I mean, I was really convinced that this was a really good thing that I was doing.
Yeah. Would you look back on it now and be like, yeah, that was absolutely a really great place for my money to go?
Oh, well, when I look at what happened to that, to the church and the lives that were blown up, and the church doesn't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the just what it went through. I would say in the big picture, I don't know that it did so much. I was partially kicked out because I started questioning some of the rigidity and saying, love acceptance might have something to do with this, other than
Mm-hmm.
these rigid rules,
Yeah.
which mostly affected women.
Yeah. Typically, too.
And I digress. I think it was this guy talking about fundamentalism in any religion, and said one commonality in fundamentalism is women are second citizens.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so when I look back at that, I'm like, yeah, probably not the best place for my money. But at that time, there was no questioning.
Yeah.
This was the right thing to do.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah.
Sarah, I think we are about out of time for this episode. Um, but would you come back for another one?
Absolutely. This was fun, and the time went by so fast.
Well, I don't know if I'm counting the minutes right or not. We'll
This
find
felt
out.
like, how we lose track of time when we sit down and have like lunch, or, we're in the hallway, just kind of conversations under the trees or something. This is what happens. The time goes by so fast when we get into these topics.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to another conversation. Thanks for joining me, Rick Kaler, for another episode of Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. This is where I combine the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Remember, every financial behavior, whether it appears illogical to you or others, makes perfect sense when we understand the underlying beliefs, feelings, and thoughts. Sign up for my weekly blog at financialawakenings.com. I hope you'll join me again for our next episode.